Alright, everyone. Unfortunately, my Speedfire wing blew up in midair when I was testing the Marcus Koch props on a speed pass. So the bad news is I need a new wing. The good news is you asked for a build tutorial. Here is a build tutorial. I will be improving the wings. They failed exactly where the carbon rods inside them joined, so I will be reinforcing that location. And let's get started. I'm assuming you have no idea how to do such a wing, so feel free to skip ahead. We start by laying out our wing plans, kindly made by Mr. Pertime on the RC Group's forum, as such. And these are tiled PDFs, so we'll need to cut them together. Let me just show you how to do it, but you will most likely know how to. Okay, we take a ruler and a pen. Just lay the ruler over the join marks and draw a little line. And we'll do the same thing for all the pages. So I will probably make a time lapse right now, because this will take quite a while. Okay, now that we have drawn our lines, we just need to cut them together. So cut off one strip at each joining line. Okay, now we've made our cuts, and now we need to tape the pieces together. Which is pretty easy, just make sure you get them all on straight. Make sure you also tape down the back of the paper, that way it won't come undone when you're working on it. Alright, so you should end up with something like this. Then you get out your scissors and you start cutting the wing out. I will only be needing a wing, so the stabilizer will be garbage. So let's start cutting. And we're done cutting out these wings. So I use Depron boards about 80 centimeters long, so I can't fit the entire wing onto it. If you have some massive Depron stock, like a meter long or so, you can just cut out the wing in one piece. But as I don't have such a thing, I will be cutting the wing in half. Okay, next step, take out your glue stick. And this is the most important factor. It should be really cheap, bad glue stick, because that way the paper won't stick to Depron too well, so you will be able to get it off and you won't have all kinds of leftover bits of paper on your Depron. So take the glue stick, easy as pie, just glue up your wing. Okay, done. Then you line up the middle joining part of your wing with the edge of the Depron. I hope you can see this well. So you'll have a nice and straight line right there. Okay. I did it. And now you just softly lay down your wing. Take something around to smooth it out. That way it will And now you take a pen and just trace out the edges real easy. Since my last wing failed, I will be reinforcing this wing further so I can fly even faster. And I will also try to give this wing a bit of a thinner airfoil. So that means that I will be dumping a lot of weight into reinforcements and I won't be able to run flaps, probably, because of weight constraints. So I will not cut out the flaps, but if you don't really care about the 250 gram limit, or you have a much lighter model somehow, then you can also cut these out. Okay, this is my method for drawing out these aileron lines. You just take a ruler, lay them over the lines, and then you take an old pen, or a new pen for that matter, one you don't mind destroying maybe, and you just press through the aileron line onto the foam, and make sure to do it a few times so you get a nice indentation in the foam, and do the same for the edges of the aileron lines. Now we're done drawing the wing, so you just pull this off, and you see the problem already. The glue stick I used was too good, so now we've got some paper stuck to the foam, but you can just wash that off later. No problem, just put it under a tap, just some running water, and it will come off pretty easily. Okay, now we draw out these lines for the ailerons we pressed into the foam. Take a ruler again to make sure it's really straight, and start drawing. So that's one wing. Next we take the other template. I can do it this way. So we take the glue stick again, glue it up, and you know how the rest of this goes, so I'll probably skip ahead here. Okay, our wing templates, our wing stock, I should say, are done, the course. So usually I just cut it out roughly with a pair of scissors and then sand the edges down until they meet the lines. So you can do the same thing, or you can cut them out with a razor blade, but you should be really careful because it's really easy to tear the Depron, and then you'll be left with a hole in your wing, which nobody likes. This works pretty well, but it takes some extra work. But if you don't mind a bit more sanding, which you will already be doing a lot of in this build, then just do it this way. It's easier. I can also demonstrate how to do it with a razor blade. I'll do that on the next part of the wing, but I wouldn't recommend it unless you really hate sanding. So if you want to do it with a razor blade, you just take a razor blade, or a scalpel for that matter, and insert it, which isn't working right now. Okay, yeah, right here. You take a razor blade and you just start gently cutting the Depron. No really large pressures or you'll tear it. And just start working on it pass by pass, just really slowly cutting it down. But I don't like that method, so I'll be just cutting it out this way. This works fine. This is what happens when you cut the Teflon too roughly with a razor blade, but I don't care because it's way off the edge. So now you have your wings. Nice. Now we go to the sink and wash off the excess paper. Alright, see you there. Alright, we're downstairs. I've got a wet piece of paper and now we just lightly rub off the excess glue and the excess paper that's still left on the foam, and it comes off really easy if you just use regular glue stick, because that type of glue hates water. Okay, now we take the other wing off and we do the same for the other wing. All of the paper is gone. You just throw out your wet piece of paper. You take some dry paper and then you dry it off. Easy as that. And now all your excess glue is gone. Alright, we're at my workbench right now, and we are now going to sand down the edges of the wing to the lines we drew, and that way we'll end up with a nice wing shape. Unfortunately, I don't really have a way of filming this without holding my camera in one hand, but it's pretty simple. You'll get the gist of it pretty quickly. You just take some really coarse grit sandpaper, put it up until the edge and just start sanding. Yeah? So this should be easy. We're back here. Next we'll install the carbon rods inside the wing. I've got the wing from my crashed one right here, and as you can see right where the carbon rod ends, it just blew off. So the rest of the wing is really nice and strong, so we'll keep it like that, that's fine. But we'll mainly reinforce this area with some extra carbon rods and some carbon tape. And if I can't really pull it out right now. I'll dissect this wing later. But I want the same location for these carbon rods, but I was too stupid to draw out the location in the plans, so we'll be measuring it right here. So the first rod is approximately 3 centimeters from the leading edge at the root, and it ends about 2 centimeters from the leading edge at the tip and is about 1.2 centimeters from that leading edge. So this side is the bottom of our wings, so we'll need to draw it out on this side. Take the ruler and just measure out 3 centimeters from the leading edge. And the same goes for this side. I can also just wait, this way is easier, just measure from the aileron location to the rod, and that is 5.1 centimeters. So I'll draw out the location of the aileron right here and just measure it that way. 5.1 centimeters, and that gives us points right there. Now just take your ruler and draw it out. That's the first one done. Now we'll just go on to the second one. Also draw out the aileron location. About 5.1, 5.2 centimeters straight up from the leading edge, trailing edge I mean. Just make a dot right there. Take the ruler. Check if they are approximately the same. This one needs to go down a bit more towards the tip. Doesn't really matter that much. That's better. Okay. I'll be using a hollow 4mm rod at the root, which is really stiff, and then I'll be using a solid 3mm rod further out onto the wing. I'll just put them inside each other, so that shouldn't be a problem. Now I'll measure out how much 4mm I've got left. It's 42 centimeters, so I'll draw out 22 centimeters from the root. Now what, let's do 21 centimeters, that way we'll have some leeway. Using a different color of pen, please. I'm using red, which isn't working. Another red, yeah, that's better. Alright, now we draw out a 4mm slot for this spar. And the same up to this point, where the 4mm spar will end. Now we'll just connect those points. And now we'll draw out a 3mm slot on this side. And we'll do that same thing for the other wing, but you know how it works right now. So I will skip ahead a bit. Alright, I'm done drawing out the slots. Next we'll need to cut a slot into the wing. For that I will be using a scalpel. Use the sharpest one you've got. And we'll do a bit of a weird technique. Take the scalpel and start cutting along the slot, but make sure you don't cut all the way through the foam. So you want to cut maybe 2/3 into the foam, not all the way. And you'll have to do the cuts in multiple passes so you don't tear the foam. Alright, now we're done cutting the slot. Take your razor blade and just start digging out the foam out of this slot. Just poke your razor blade in there and don't do it all the way. That way the foam you made a cut into will come out and the rest of the foam will stay in there. If you cut too deep, you'll now just tear out the other side of the foam, which you don't want. So make sure your cuts aren't too deep. And just start digging until you have a slot. The slot might look a bit rough now, but we'll smooth it out later. And the reason I cut this slot and install the spar before making the airfoil is that way I can perfectly match the airfoil to the shape which is needed because of the spar, so that way you won't have a spar halfway sticking out when you're done making the airfoil, which isn't exactly aerodynamic, and you'll lose lift and gain a lot of drag that way. Okay, I'm done digging out the foam. Next, you take your spar, the one you want to use, and just push it into the slot in order to smooth it out. You'll compress the foam a bit. That way that location is stronger than it would be if you just cut it all the way down, and your spar can lay down nice and smoothly. Just keep on doing that until the foam isn't that rough anymore. And every once in a while check if your spar can lay in there completely flat. Also make sure you still know where this should end. And as you can see, this spar is now laying pretty flat in here. But it isn't flat enough, so I'll compress the foam a bit more. This way you really shape the foam to the shape of your spar. Because I'm using a round spar, I can't just cut a square slot and be done with it. This works way better. This 3mm part is done. I'll press the 4mm part a bit more, and then we'll also be done with that. Yep, it fits now. And this way you have a nice fitting slot for your spar that we can fill with resin later. So now this is what the other side of the wing looks like. You can just about see it. Now I'll do the other wing, and then we'll go on to installing the spar. I just cut down my carbon rods to the right size, and I have my wings with the slots here. And now we'll just start filling these with resin. So let's get started. Since we formed the slots with our carbon rods, we won't need a ridiculous amount of resin as you would need if the slot was square instead of rounded. But we'll just pour some resin into this, and luckily epoxy is self-leveling, so will run out nice and smoothly. And I'm just using regular laminating epoxy, where you need to mix the hardener with the resin itself in a 1:2 ratio. Wipe off the excess later. See, you can still use some resin right here, so we'll just pour that on in. And when we're done with this, you need to cover the wing with some plastic the epoxy won't stick to, or waxed plastic, that's also alright. And then you just put something heavy on it, so the carbon rods will lay flat. But this method works pretty well. This wing is done. Now we'll do the next one. I'll just start pouring. Sure you get the resin everywhere. And if you mix up like 10 grams of epoxy, it should be enough. You won't need a lot, and half of it you'll wipe off later. This is the lightest but strongest option I know of for gluing in the spar. You could use, I don't know, hot glue or some CA, but that is maybe a bit lighter, while hot glue won't be probably, and it is less strong than this. I also used this technique on one of my other planes, and it produced a really strong spar. Again, wipe off the excess resin, make sure the wing is clean, and start pushing this down into there. I'll add some more resin near the root. And right here at the joiner I need some extra. You can see if you need some extra resin by the gap between the spar and the wing. If you can still see a gap that's not filled with resin, you need some more resin. Now check the bottom of your wing for excess epoxy so you don't glue it down to your newspaper or whatever you're working on. Okay, that's done. Now, we're done here. Just put something heavy on it to keep the wing flat and to keep the spar in there. And then you'll be ready for the sanding stage. I'm just laying down my wings right here on the workbench with some mylar over them, because the epoxy won't stick that well to mylar. So that way I can just lay this heavy plate on it and put some other weights on it, and it will be nice and flat and the epoxy won't stick to all the mylar. Okay, let's do it. The wings are now set to dry. I've got drill on it with the box and all the drill bits and these two faces, so they are now pressed flat against the workbench, and that way they'll cure out nice and flat, and you should just let it cure for about a day like this, and then we'll check on it tomorrow. Okay, we're back at the workbench once again. Now we'll start working on the most important bit of this build, and that is shaping the wing profile. We already glued in the spars with some epoxy, and now we will be sanding down our airfoil into the wing. And the basic principle of it is just you take the top of the wing, this side so, and you start sanding down from the spar to the leading edge and trailing edge. And you should leave a thickness at leading edge and trailing edge of about 2 millimeters, so that way we can also sand the bottom of the wing in order to get a semi-symmetrical airfoil. Let's get started. I like to do the first bit with a really coarse file, that way we can sand it down pretty quickly, and then I'll work my way down with first 60 grit sandpaper, then 120 grit, and then 240 grit, and then we should be done. So I will just start sanding, and then I'll show what I achieve as a result and what you should strive for. Let's go. The workbench isn't flat enough, so I'll be using this plate from now on. This should work. Okay. Now the trailing edge is shaped a bit like this. We'll take the 60 grit sandpaper and sand it down. Well, it used to be 60 grit, but now it's probably a bit less since it's already been used. And we'll sand this down to about 2 millimeters. Let's go. Well, if you take a look at it now, you can see that the trailing edge has been sanded down really nice and uniformly. And if you look at the side, it's a pretty nice airfoil shape already, even though we haven't done the leading edge yet. And you can see this process is pretty quick, so it shouldn't take you too long to sand it down, especially if you use a file first. And now we're done with the trailing edge pretty much. I'll start on the leading edge. With the leading edge, it's very important to not create a sharp corner like with the trailing edge, but to nicely round it over. Give it a bit of a radius. If you don't do that, you'll have a airfoil that stalls very easily and will also hunt up and down as you're flying, because the center of lift will shift back and forth as the angle of attack increases. So give it a nice round radius, and I will only use the file for a little bit here. I'm not done yet, but you can see I have a nice round radius right on here, and that's what you're striving for. So I'll continue sanding down. This is a bit too round, but I'll continue this way. It works pretty well. So once again, we end up with a pretty uniform leading edge right here. You will need to eyeball it a little bit to see if it's really uniform. And we have pretty much this airfoil. So now I'll start working on the bottom of the wing, and that way we'll get a semi-symmetrical airfoil. But I see I need to sand this part a bit down a bit more. That's better. Let's do the bottom of the wing. You won't need to sand down the bottom of the wing that much, so I'll be using some finer sandpaper. That way we won't sand too quickly. Okay, I'm nearly done with the trailing edge, and as you can see we're starting to get a semi-symmetrical airfoil on here, and the trailing edge is really thin. I'll work it down a little bit more with some finer sandpaper, but in the end it will be almost so thin you can see right through it. So now I'll do the leading edge and I'll touch up some bits, and then we should be done with this wing. Make sure to also round the bottom of the leading edge. Don't create a sharp edge like with the trailing edge. Okay, the leading edge is pretty much done now as well. You can see nice semi-symmetrical airfoil. I'll now take some finer grit sandpaper and really make sure the trailing edge becomes thin, and I'll work out some of the rough edges and do the wingtip a bit more. Okay, let's do. Okay, I'm done pretty much. You really need to be careful when working on the trailing edge because it becomes really thin. I already tore it a little bit right here, but I'll fix that later. As we will gloss over this anyway, so it won't matter that much, but just be careful you don't tear a lot of the foam, and then you should be left with something like this. This airfoil turned out better than the previous one that failed, so I'm happy with that. And I'll do the finishing touches on this one, and I'll do the other wing off camera, and then we should be ready to join the wings and then gloss them.